I'm Arlene Fish. I'm a jeweler normally, but most recently I've been involved in a larger scale installation project, which was commissioned actually by the Racine Art Museum in Wisconsin, which has a bank of windows, rather large windows along the street, and they commission one artist a year to do something in those windows. And when they asked me if I'd be interested, I thought I wasn't sure I could do anything because I don't work large scale, and I don't feel comfortable with large pieces having to handle them. But as I thought about it, I thought if I could do multiple things, then I could work at my own scale and be quite happy doing that. So I proposed that I would do jellyfish because I love their shapes and they're brilliantly colored. And I knew right away that I could make them. I could make something that looked like a jellyfish. And so when they said yes, we were off and running, and it took me a year to make all the jellyfish, which then filled those windows. And since that time, it was up for a year, and since that time it's traveled. It went to San Diego to the Mingei Museum, where it was a totally different installation. And now it's here at Bellevue again in a totally different installation. So it's very interesting for me to see work that I conceived of in one format able to adapt itself to another format. Normally, I'm a jeweler, but I don't make small things. I've never been really interested in things like rings and earrings because they're not big enough. My favorite jewelry form is a collar because it frames the face and it enhances the person wearing it. And it's a larger space for me to work. So much of my work, especially in the last 20 years, has been rather large collars. And mostly I work in silver and gold until about 10 years ago when these colored wires became more available. I had always known about the colored wires, which are copper coated and then dyed. And I knew about them because they're used in industry as an element for wrapping armatures in motors. So it's been around a long time, but not in such a wide variety of colors. But I found the wire, as I said, a long time ago, and started to work with it and found that I really enjoyed what I could do with that wire. I can do the same things mostly in fine silver, except for the machine work. I can't machine knit fine silver on any of my knitting machines. It is done commercially, but my machines don't do that. So I had to decide, do I give up working in the way I like to work in order to continue to work in silver, or do I just go ahead and do something that works? And so I love working in color. You can tell from my clothes that I like bright colors. So it wasn't a great hardship to give up working in silver. I still do silver work in other ways, but in the knitting that I did at least for the jellyfish, I have actually done that quite a lot for making jewelry as well. Things that are like scarves that go around the neck and tie, or big collars like this with ruffles on the ends. And for me, it's a very satisfying kind of work because it's not precise, and I'm not a very precise person. So it's a very forgiving material. And when I knit on my circular knitting machine, which is a sock knitting machine, it makes tubes. And the little sock knitter that I have, which is a hand-cranked one, I can make two sizes. a larger size with all the needles and a smaller size with half the needles. So that's my restriction. I can only work with that scale. But I've found I can do lots of things with it. I can multiply it, I can stretch it, I can shrink it. And it's always a challenge, I think, to keep working with something that is comfortable, because you tend to begin to find that you're repeating yourself. And I'm probably at that stage right now. The corals that are in with the jellyfish are all done on this circular knitting machine, and then they're crocheted on the top. And crocheting is something I learned late in life. My mother was not good at crocheting. She was a dynamite knitter, so I knew how to knit, but I didn't know how to crochet. And when I decided to author a book on the subject of textile techniques in metal, I knew that I had to try everything to see what worked. And so I taught myself to crochet. And for a long time, all I did was make chain stitches, because anybody can do that. But now I've gotten a little bit more sophisticated, and I can crochet ruffles and little edges on things. And that was a very fun approach to the corals, because the ruffles that I can produce look exactly like coral structures. And I was not restricted in color, because corals are also very colorful. So I just sat in my studio surrounded by little cylinders standing on end, waiting to be ruffled on the top. And I enjoyed that experience a lot. Now that project is over, it's a little hard to think about, is there another kind of installation that I'd like to do? I've always continued to make jewelry, because I feel that that's what is most expressive for me. But the idea of doing larger installations, now that I know I can do them, is also attractive. So in fact, I was invited to do a proposal for a public building in San Diego. And it was such that the people who were asked to make proposals were limited. I think we were 8 in the end, and we were paid to make the proposal. So I had already decided that I would like to make flowers. After the jellyfish were done, I had to think about, what else can I do with these processes that I use. And I thought about flowers, and I thought about hanging flowers. So you would look up at the flowers that would be on the ceiling. I've always been fascinated by the hanging gardens of Babylon, which nobody knows what they look like, really, so I can make them look like what I want them to look like. And so that was the proposal that I made to the Public Art Committee, which they liked very much but did not fund. So that didn't happen. But the flowers, I had to make the flowers in order to know what they would look like. So I probably made a dozen flowers, and they're hanging in my studio, waiting for someplace to be. And it may be that soon there will be an exhibition where I can install them as a group and see how they look. But that's something in the future, probably. In the meantime, when I'm between projects, I have my own little personal project, which is saints, angels and saints. I've always made angels because I love wing shapes. So I guess I started with kind of the angels, and then I thought, women saints get really short shrift. Nobody pays attention. So I did a little research and just looked at all the women saints I could find, and I found out that I could make an alphabet if I worked really hard at it. So that was where I started. I'll do women saints, one for each letter of the alphabet. I don't think I'm going to get to the end. I've made 10. It's sort of spaced out. I didn't go in order, I'm afraid, although the first one was St. Agatha. But then I sort of jumped around, and I've done St. Rose of Lima and St. Joan of Arc. So I'm now at 10, and I have to decide whether I'm going to continue. I've never shown them to anybody because they're a very private project. But I want to show them, and I want to show them as a group. So I've figured out that I'm going to install each one on a plank of wood that looks like a niche. So it has an arch on the top, and I've gold leafed it, and the angels will, the saints will be installed one on in each panel. So I've only made 2 panels. I have that to look forward to. Gold leafing all those panels is not fun, but I think I'll get it done within the next year. Well, when I was teaching at Skidmore, which was a long time ago, there was already a metalsmith on the faculty. So I was never, who preceded me, so I was never going to teach metals if I stayed on the faculty. But the weaving teacher was retiring, and she said to me, "Why don't you take over the weaving program?" And I said, "Well, Marion, I'd love to, but I don't know how to weave." And she said, "Well, we'll teach you, and we'll send you to school." So she taught me how to set up a loom and so on, and then Skidmore sent me to Haystack for a summer. And I worked with Jack Larson and Ted Hallman. I learned a lot. So then I went back to Skidmore and taught the weaving program, but only for 2 years, because then a job came up in San Diego to start a metals program. And I applied for that and was awarded the position. So I moved to San Diego thinking that I was going to be totally working in metal. As soon as the students found out that I knew how to weave, there was no weaving program at all. And so I found myself starting 2 programs simultaneously. And in my own work, I was still working in metal. I didn't actually ever show any weaving. I did some because I had to know how, but I didn't show anything professionally. And after 10 years, it was too much to handle anymore, so we hired someone to run the weaving program. But in the meantime, I had gone to South America to look at pre-Columbian weaving, which I was very interested in, and saw things that either had metal applied to them or were actually made of metal. And I saw a little scrap of woven gold that just went instantly into my mind. And I came back from that trip, which was in the early 60s, and did a few pieces where the first one was I sewed metal to a fabric that I made. And then I thought, well, this is silly. I know how to weave. Why don't I just structure them together? So I did. I did several pieces where the metal parts were held together by fiber. And then I went to Denmark to study chasing, and so it got put aside until 1970. I was on sabbatical in London, and I needed something to do that didn't require a workshop, because I had a workshop, but it was only available during the day. And those cold winter evenings in London, I needed something to amuse me or occupy me, and I did some knitting and some weaving because I thought I should find out if that would work, and it did. And I didn't continue full time in those, but 2 years later, a publisher asked me if I'd like to write a book, and I said no. And then I thought about it, and I said, well, if you let me write a book about this subject, I would be interested, because I know there's nothing available. I've looked. And so I contracted to write a book on this textile techniques in metal, and to do that, I had to do all of it. I had to explore everything that I knew and a lot of things that I didn't know. And I just suddenly had all this information and all this experience, and I've sort of worked with them ever since. I'm a museum hound. I'm an urban traveler. I don't go around the world looking at scenery. I go around the world in cities, to cities, and looking at artifacts. And I find that I look better, I look more closely if I'm drawing them. So I've always done that. I go to museums by myself with a small sketchbook and a pencil, and I draw what I am attracted to. And I've learned so much from doing that. I've learned about hinges, I've learned about catches, I've learned about ways of putting things together that I would never have thought of on my own, because they're not traditional ways. And especially looking at other cultures besides Western Europe, it's such a treasure trove of information. So that's basically where I've learned almost everything I know. The basic skills of working in metal I learned in Denmark. I discovered after graduate school that I really didn't know enough to continue, and that going to Europe, going to some place where there was a really strong tradition in metal would be the most useful. I was lucky enough to receive a Fulbright grant for a year in Denmark, and I went to school in Copenhagen, and at the same time worked in a workshop. And I learned an enormous amount technically that year. The Danes thought I was there to mimic their designs. In fact, the rector of the school accused me of that. And I said, no, I have my own ideas. I just don't know how to make them. So what I want here is skill. And that came across, and one of the board members of the school invited me to come to his workshop on a daily basis, and he assigned one of the workmen to work with me. And that was just an incredible opportunity. We agreed that the workshop leader would approve my designs and say, you make this one and not that one. And then he would say to the young man sitting next to me that he was to help me with whatever I needed. He wasn't to make it. That was my job. And that was a really rare opportunity, because there aren't so many people who are generous with their business. I guess I've traveled a lot in my lifetime. I've been very lucky. I recently gave a talk in Ireland, and I wasn't sure what they wanted me to talk about. So I decided to talk about, and they said, well, we have students and they don't seem to be adventurous. And so I talked about making choices and taking risks. And I think that probably describes my career. I didn't know I was going to work in metal. I thought I was going to be a painter until I went to graduate school and discovered I was a terrible painter. I mean, I just was not a good painter. I wasn't terrible, but I was never going to be a good painter. And so I was assigned as a graduate assistant to a silversmith. And so I worked for him, and I thought, well, I could take his classes, which I did. And I found it really wonderful. I loved the material. It doesn't change by itself. I mean, I was also working in ceramics at the time, and I really hated this clay under my fingernails. And I also hated the fact that you put it in a kiln and you didn't know what was going to happen. and I didn't like that uncertainty. So metal really suited me better. My first teaching job was at Wheaton College in Massachusetts, and Taunton, Attleboro, which is the region where the college is located, is the center of the industry, of the jewelry industry in America. That's where all commercial jewelry is manufactured, large quantities of it at any rate. And so I was able to find a workshop just by driving around the countryside. There were lots of private workshops, individual workshops, that were owned by people who worked in the factories. So they weren't there during the day, but they liked being able to make their own things. And one of them invited me to use his studio. And that was just, again, a really generous offer, but very unexpected. I mean, I didn't think anybody was going to do that. And so, I was launched into working in metal. So that was sort of the first, it wasn't the first risk. Going to graduate school was a big risk. I put myself on a train in New York and got off in Peoria, Illinois, not knowing anybody, with a steamer trunk. But it worked out. And when I decided I wanted to go to Europe, that also worked out. I mean, I applied for a Fulbright, which I didn't know if I would get, but if you don't apply, you know you won't get. And it was a wonderful opportunity. And I've tended to do that. If an opportunity appears that looks like it might suit me, I tend to go ahead and take it, even though it may not be comfortable. But like writing a book was not really what I wanted to do. But it was interesting, and it turned out that the book, when it was published, I think in 1975, had no effect. I mean, people bought the book, but they didn't do anything. It was 10 years later, or even more, before I began to see that it actually made a difference. So that was very rewarding.
Have you published a second book now?
Well, the first book went out of print after 10 years, and that was really a struggle because people kept writing to me, where can I get a copy of your book? And there weren't any, because the publisher had sold that division of books to another publisher who after 2 years decided they weren't going to do anything. But in the meantime, they destroyed all the plates. So finding another publisher was really difficult. I worked at it on and off for almost 8 years before Lark Books responded enthusiastically and did not want me to pay for it. Yes. Luckily, I had all the photographs because I had taken them all myself. So I had all the material, and of course I had a manuscript. So it was republished in, I think it was 96. And it, again, has sold out. It's out of print again, and I don't think I'm not going to try to take it up again. But I then did write another book for Lark Books on crochet, which I hadn't planned to do. They called me and asked me if I knew anybody who could write a book on crochet. And I said, well, yeah, I probably do, but how about me? And they said, oh, well, we didn't think you'd be interested. So that was another kind of unexpected risk. Because that book, I had never done a project book, but that's what they wanted. So I prevailed upon my friends and colleagues that I knew used crochet to design a piece which they would give to the book. And people, again, were so generous. I think we had 14 artists, and there are 20 projects. I did some. And when I put it all together, I rewrote all the instructions that the artists had sent so that it would be all in one voice. But I don't speak crochet language. I don't understand all those symbols. So I said to Lark, you'll have to hire somebody to rewrite the instructions in crochet language, because I don't know that. But they decided not to do that. So it was published in the way I had written it, which is the way that I would want it if I were looking at the book. And a lot of people have said to me that has made it much more available to them. Because if you're not a textile artist, reading those directions is just mind-boggling. But to read in prose, do 3 of these and then do 4 of those, that's easy. So the book has gone well, and I'm glad I did it. But I don't think I'm going to do any more.